Greetings. Just a reminder before we start that if you're looking for any of the webinars that I've been doing and some of the dissection processes and programs, then I'm just about to end a membership that will allow you access to all of that. That's about to come to a close. You've got a couple of weeks of that. So please don't waste time. Head over to Functional Anatomy. You've got hours of dissection, webinars, all for 225 quid, but that's going away soon. And I'm going to be announcing a hugely exciting project that's coming up in the autumn. So head on over to Functional Anatomy and have a little look on there. But for this week, I have been thinking, as the philosophers of old would sit and do, they would ponder the nature of existence. Do things exist? And if they do, how do they exist? René Descartes, the famous French philosopher of the 16th and 17th century, is famous for saying cogito, or is it cogito, ergo sum? Somebody will correct me. But anyway, that means I think, therefore I am. Now, I'm not going to go all deep on all this week. I'm just sometimes puzzled by things that come to me that I ponder on, and they get talked about as if they are really completely real. And then sometimes you start to scratch the surface and look for the reality of them, and there is no basis for their existence. What Descartes also said, and people don't realize, is that he said dubito ergo sum. I doubt, therefore I am. So I think that's probably more a summation of me, the doubter. So what can I be thinking about this week that is a thing that people refer to, talk about, they exercise, strengthen, effectively build whole industries, courses and regimes around? The answer is, of course, the core. The core. It's one of those things that can't exist really because it can't be defined in any meaningful way, and so therefore has to rely on individual interpretation. Now, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with individual interpretation of things per se in relation to existence, and there are lots of things that are subjective and which can only be defined by the self, you know, like love, God, pain, Piers Morgan, spinach. But the core is a bit different because it's talked about and taught about as a real thing and with a conviction that belies its lack of reality. A platform that I was really fond of during lockdown was something called Clubhouse. You may have heard of it. It's a conversation platform, and I haven't been on for a while actually, and I met some great people on there, Dean Hammond and a great bunch of people. And a lot of the rooms that I'd go into and I'd frequent were populated by people in the fitness industry, and people would often talk about some of the great myths that are around. And one of the hand grenades that I would enjoy occasionally tossing into one of these rooms was the fact, I would say, as a myth buster, that there is no such thing as the core. There is no core. And as you may have gathered from me by now, I don't mind being a bit of a wind-up merchant. You may not be surprised to hear that the response was always pretty explosive. For a start, people were outraged. It was almost a heretical thing to say, and people rushed to defend this concept of the core. The trouble is, the way they did this was rather self-defeating, as everybody in turn said, well, I think the core is this. I explain the core in this way. My understanding of the core is. So this shows that if everybody's got a different belief, understanding, explanation, and definition, then the very thing that you're trying to define doesn't exist in the way that you think it does. Creates an existential crisis. This idea of the core and the principles that lie behind it and the idea of core stability aren't just illogical and implausible, but actually they're potentially harmful if we're not careful about it. If we're going to take the core of an apple, for example, you know, it would be from the top to the bottom, and we would understand that it was a center, that within its center there was something definable. There was some seeds, a harder structure, that sort of pithy bit that would be in the middle, and something would be growing out of it. It would be a central outpouring, if you like, a central longitudinal point. If you were going to extend that analogy to the human, then you probably want to look at structures like the erectus spinae and the ligaments that run up and down the spine, perhaps immediately either side of them, you know, I could go with that if there was a degree of consistency and we were talking about, say, the different roles that these, you know, ILS muscles play in flexion and extension of the body. Perhaps the way that we go into lateral flexion away from a core line, the principle of balance and loading through a central core, all that makes a degree of sense to me. Generally though, what people are talking about when talking about the core, they're referring to mostly abdominal structures. Now I don't know whether this has changed, but in particular the transverse abdominus was a particular obsession of people a while ago, and the exhortation to control, stabilize, contract and otherwise generally work your core was centered around this idea of the transverse abdominus in particular, creating stability for the spine. There was this idea that this is what happened. There's a couple of problems with this. Firstly, it was noted in Gray's Anatomy, one edition some years ago back in the 50s, that the transverse abdominus was absent as a normal variation. I think it was 46 edition. Now, I did find the reference a while back, but it only appeared once and was then dropped. Now, I've never seen in dissection the transverse abdominus absent, but there's a massive variation in how it appears and the range of muscle it has on it and where that starts. And I'm also happily able to tell you that there is no way that you would know whether you've got a transverse abdominus or not, because you can't feel it contract either on yourself or anybody else. It's just not possible. The layers of the abdomen, the internal, external, oblique, that lie over the top of the transverse abdominus are multi-directional and fairly thin and impossible to contract individually. There's also big contracting structures that are around it and through it, such as the latissimus dorsi, that come around and blend into the fascia of the lumbar area, as well as the abdomen, and these are going to contract and create a degree of tension in there as well. Secondly, there's no evidence at all to suggest that working or strengthening, let alone contracting abdominal structures creates any stability or assistance as far as the spine is concerned. Indeed, some evidence suggests that overworking the abdomen could create instability in certain spinal areas, particularly if there's been injury. Just contracting something doesn't make it stable, it just makes it contracted. That the working of one particular area or the concentration of stabilizing one particular area in exclusion to another is always going to be detrimental in the long term if it's taken to any degree. Something else is going to have to pick up the slack from that contraction. Back at the end of the 90s, when Pilates really exploded in the UK, there was this obsession with contractility of the core and everybody was going on about it, and a lot of people got injured and hurt their backs in an attempt to contract into and through movements in the mistaken belief that they were somehow stabilizing something. Human movement is a pretty balanced and intelligent thing, and when you move, the things that are allowing you to do it without falling over already know what they have to do. They don't need you to go out of your way to stabilize them. Additionally, what was seen was that young women who'd overly worked their core, overly stable state, had big problems when it came to pregnancy, and prolapses and things like this were kind of a natural consequence of this. Stability is another word for strength or loading, and if you want washboard abs, then knock yourself out, but it doesn't mean that you're in any way more stable as a result, or that you are stable as far as a core is concerned. If we say there's no such thing as a core, and then we extend it by saying that there's no such thing as isolated stability anywhere, then by default you can't have core stability. So anybody that's saying to you during exercise, or you hear that, work on that core, focus on that core, then you might as well wiggle your toes or fart. It doesn't make any difference. It makes as much sense as anything else. I'm all for bringing awareness into movement, the way that we move, focusing on how we might breathe as we move, what other structures are being used and involved. And these are methods that I will use with clients, sports people, people that have got injuries, and particularly people with pain. Noticing the ability to contract and how that differs from one area or one side of the body to another is part of this. And anything that brings better awareness into how we move our bodies is really useful. But just simply contracting or bracing as part of doing something else, especially that the thing that you think that you're contracting isn't what you are contracting, it's just daft. So what do you think? Are you a core fanatic? Are you a core convert? That's a good one. Have you trained like this in the past? Have you been trained like this in the past? What do you think? So please leave me your comments in the comment section below. Please like, subscribe, do all those things you're supposed to do on social media, and I will see you next time.